Today we are interviewing Mr. Michael Bergen, um, the social media specialist for Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, and just have a couple of questions for him at this moment. Number one, Mr. Bergen, what obstacles have been a challenge to overcome for you at your workplace of employment? That could be something earlier in your career or something later, maybe something that's changed in technology or the way people respond to your social media.
Okay, so let's pause there for a second. The question concerns obstacles. What kinds of obstacles, technological or other, have you possibly faced?
Sure. Okay, that's a good question. First of all, as I'm addressing him on the
Sure.
video,
Yeah, why not?
first of all, any organization or business or agency that you go to work for is going to have obstacles. When it comes to communication about wildlife and conservation, of course, one of the greatest obstacles for us as an agency is to basically educate the public on how we are funded. Oklahoma government is in the spotlight today in lots of ways. Sometimes it doesn't come with all the best warm and fuzzy thoughts from the public, right? Of course not. However, one cool thing about the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation is it is what's called a non-appropriated agency.
Okay.
This is government speak here, but basically that means that it is not funded by taxpayer dollars. It is funded by the sale of hunting and fishing licenses that we issue. Okay, so that means that money that we earn off of the sale of hunting and fishing licenses to sportsmen is what directly funds our operations across the state. So all the stuff that you've seen going on at the Capitol and the protests with education recently, and the way the legislature spends our money as a state, it's kind of almost a separate deal to what we have going on. There's some tie-in, and the legislators do have a lot of impact over what we can and can't do, but our money comes from that sale of hunting and fishing licenses and from the support of sportsmen who go and buy sporting goods. Certain taxes that sportsmen pay to manufacturers then come to the states for wildlife conservation. That's the biggest message, and that's the biggest obstacle, because we want people to understand that their participation as sportsmen directly impacts conservation. It directly is conservation. So that's the biggest obstacle, is that a lot of people don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't know that sportsmen fund wildlife conservation. The very reason that there's so much diversity in our state's wildlife, that there's lots of deer, fish, wild turkey, you name it, is directly because of the people who like to hunt and fish them. That interest in those species creates the momentum for the wellness of that species. So when they give us money, we then can operate. And so that's the biggest obstacle, is we need to keep that funding channel alive, which means that my job as a communication specialist is that I have to make people take an interest in hunting and fishing and the sporting activities. So I have to be constantly thinking about recruiting new sportsmen, retaining existing sportsmen, reactivating previous sportsmen. I have to keep that going, because without that, there's no funding for wildlife conservation.
One of the books we read in our major, but we're also returning to it in this course, is a book by the title of Spreadable Media, Creating Value in a Networked Culture, something like that. Henry Jenkins, Sam Ford, and Joshua Green, the co-authors. And their basic premise of the book is, if it doesn't spread, it's dead. And the major thesis of the work is that we need to understand, as you're talking about right here, that either that your method or channel or medium of mass communication is no longer singularly focused. And it's not just evolving from one platform to another, but that it's multiplying out, that you have multiple factors you have to simultaneously consider, and multiple constituents, to use sort of a political term there, that you are in the business of trying to communicate with and satisfy.
Yeah, and to kind of emphasize that, and you talked about the way things change and the way your methods have to change. Decades ago, you really only needed to, as a wildlife agency, you really only needed to provide the law enforcement. You needed to provide some biology. So in other words, you needed some biologists out there creating pathway,
Some
for,
stats, some
Yes.
research.
Yeah, and then you had to put forth some information. The sportsmen were hungry to come and join up and go be active in Oklahoma. Today it's a different story. The old adage, "If you build it, they will come," from the movie we all know. That's not. It's almost like not really true for wildlife agencies anymore. It used to be true that if we created the habitat and we put the rules out there and we gave people the information, they would come and hunt and fish. Now you have to do a little more. We're competing with everything. So, similarly.
Awesome. We are just getting started, folks. We're going to take a quick break, refill those coffee cups, right? Stay caffeinated, and we'll be right back with more of your video questions in this series. Thank you.